And you may, for all I know, not be the moderate you pretend to be, because you may be engaging in taqiyah and be engaging in lying for the purpose of furthering your religion. Why should I believe you?
That there is taqiyah, which is deception and lies to advance Islam in non-Muslim societies.
This concept called Taqiyah.
There is, of course, as you well know, in Islam, a doctrine of deception, a doctrine of deceiving unbelievers and making them think that Islam teaches, or that Muslims in any particular situation believe something other than what they actually believe. And
Taqiyah and
that there is taqiyah.
Taqiyah and being.
According to haters, their definition of taqiyah is this: Islamic tactics of taqiyah teaches Muslims to practice deception, fraud, and double standards to spread Islam. Again, this is their definition of taqiyah. This is not the Islamic definition nor the Muslim understanding of what taqiyah is.
there is, of course, as you well know, in Islam, a doctrine of deception, a doctrine of deceiving unbelievers and making them think that Islam teaches, or that Muslims in any particular situation believe something other than what they actually believe. And
further, according to haters, taqiyah, lying for Islam. There are in fact several verses in the Quran which condone lying and deception, and classical and contemporary Sunni scholars have validated its place within mainstream Islam. Again, this is their claim, and as we continue, we will show beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is no such verses in the Quran, and that classical and contemporary Sunni scholars do not validate any such claims within mainstream Islam. Now, let us take a look at the highest source in Islam, which is the Quran. As we showed you a clip of Robert Spencer claiming that Muslims have this teaching of lying and deceit in any particular situation. Well, let's take a look at some of the verses that they use to claim supports this idea. In the Quran, chapter 3, verse 28, it states, "Let not the believers make unbelievers their protectors rather than the believers. Anyone who does so will have nothing to hope for from Allah, except if you fear or do so as a precaution to guard yourselves against them. Anyhow, Allah warns you to fear Him, because with Allah is your final refuge." As can be seen from the verse, nowhere does it speak of or command lying for Islam to promote Islam in any way. The part in question is here, where it says, "Except if you fear or do so as a precaution to guard yourselves against them." And what was the subject of the verse? Speaking about taking unbelievers as your protectors. So then the verse is saying you can only do so if you fear them and do so as a precaution to guard yourselves against them. But nowhere does the verse speak of lying to promote Islam or lying in any particular situation. I believe the verse is self-explanatory. So now let us take a deeper look and examine the language in which the Quran was written to see further in detail what is actually being said here. The language of the Quran is Arabic, and here we will present you with the transliteration of the Arabic words. So here the words in question are tattaqu, which means you fear, minhum, from them, tuqatan, as a precaution. The root word of taqiyah is the word ittaqa. It means to fear. It has nothing to do with lying, has nothing to do with deceit or deception. It means to fear. So the verse is speaking of you taking a precaution because you fear from these people. You fear danger. You fear harm from these people. Nothing to do with lying to them to promote Islam or any such concept. It's actually speaking of taking a precaution because of fear from danger or harm coming from these unbelievers. The actual word for lie in Arabic is kazib or kizib. Notice it has no root or connection to ittaka at all. The next verse and chapter that is claimed to support this idea of lying to promote Islam is chapter 16, verse 106 of the Quran. It reads as follows: "Whoever disbelieves in Allah after his belief, except for one who is forced, while his heart is secure in faith, but those who willingly open their breasts to disbelief, upon them is wrath from Allah, and for them is a great punishment." The part in question is here, which reads, "Except for one who is forced, while his heart is secure in faith." Again, nowhere is it speaking of promoting Islam by lying to disbelievers for any reason in any particular case. The subject matter is what? Uttering words of disbelief. You are excused for uttering words of disbelief if you are forced to do so, yet in your heart you are still secure in your faith. So you are being forced to utter words or say things against Islam and the Islamic beliefs by force. But in your heart, in your mind, you know you don't really believe those things. You're doing it because you're being forced to do so. So again, this is not speaking of promoting Islam, nor is it speaking of willful and underhanded deceit and lying to non-believers just for the cause or any reason or to spread Islam at all. The verse is very clear. Again, taking a more detailed look at the actual language, again using the transliteration. The Arabic words are illa man ukriha, which means illa is except, man one who, and ukriha is forced. So the verse is clearly speaking of a situation where the person is forced to say something against their will. You are not willfully choosing to deceive or lie to somebody, and it's not even speaking of promoting Islam. It's actually speaking of saying things of disbelief against Islam because you're being forced to do so. Moving on to another chapter and verse which they claim is in support of this idea of lying to promote Islam is chapter 2, verse 225 of the Quran. It reads, "Allah will not take you to task for oaths which you may have uttered without thought, but will take you to task only for what your hearts have conceived in earnest. For God is much forgiving, forbearing." The section in question here is where it states Allah will not take you to task for oaths which you may have uttered without thought. To them, they claim that this is somehow a free pass for Muslims to make any kind of statements of falsehood, and there are no consequences to that. But clearly, as the words clearly show, that it is speaking about statements which are made without thought. So clearly the person is not intentionally making a statement of deceit. To show that this is the case, we take a look once again at the language, and the words here are baghwi, which is unintentional speech or vain talk, showing that the person is making a statement without thought. They're not intentionally trying to, lie or deceive or any such thing. Now, just so I'm not accused of trying to sugarcoat the verse or give a nice interpretation to it, we will turn to what is known as tafsir. Let me state first that I am of the position, as are many of the scholars of the Quran, that the best tafsir or interpretation of the Quran and its verses is, of course, reading the context of the verses and using other verses of the Quran to explain the Quran. Okay? But many of our opponents like to go to the tafsir to try to, support their position about a verse. Interestingly, it obviously was not done about this verse. When we look at the interpretation of this verse, it reads that this verse means Allah does not punish or hold you accountable for the lagwa, the unintentional vows that you make. The lagwa vows are unintentional and are just like the habitual statements that the tongue repeats without really intending them. For example, you hear people all the time, "If I don't get this job, I'm going to jump out a window. If my team doesn't win the Super Bowl, I'm going to kill myself." You speak to your children, "If you don't get over here right now, you are never going to go outside for the rest of your life." These are, of course, vain and unintentional speech. And to support that claim, we go to some of the classical people of knowledge. For example, Ibn Abu Hatim reported that Ibn Abbas said, the lagwa vow includes vowing while angry. So you're angry and you say something that you really didn't intend to say because you were speaking out of anger. So you will not be held accountable for this type of statements. What's more interesting, though, is that the verse itself condemns making an intentional vow while knowing that you're lying. How did they miss this? The other part of the verse reads, but he will call you to account for that which your hearts have earned. According to the understanding of the classical people of knowledge, it was said that Ibn Abbas said, Mujahid and several others said, that this part of the verse means swearing about a matter while knowing that he is lying. If you do that, then you are held accountable. You will be punished for such account by God. So those who claim that the verse supports intentional lying, they are totally wrong, as the verse itself condemns that. The next verse that they use to claim supports the idea of intentional lying and deceit to promote Islam is chapter 66, verse 2. It reads, Allah indeed has sanctioned for you the expiation of your oaths, and Allah is your patron, and He is the wise, the knowing. Now, to further understand this verse, we need to take it in context. So let us look at the previous verse, chapter 66, verse 1, to understand what is being spoken of. When we read the verse in context, starting at verse 1, it reads, O you prophet, why do you prohibit what God has made lawful for you, seeking to please your wives? God is forgiver, merciful. So as we can see, the context here is an issue dealing with the prophet and his wives. It has nothing to do with dealing with non-believers, lying to them, or lying in any context whatsoever. Now, the verses stand on their own. It's clearly dealing with an issue that was between the prophet and his wives, of which he had prohibited himself from something which was lawful, and God therefore allowed the expiation of that, since the thing which he prohibited himself from was lawful. But for further clarification, and we know there are many doubters out there, let us take a look at the tafsir to see what it says. Again, tafsir is interpretation. It reads as follows. Al-Bukhari recorded that Ubayd bin Umair said that he heard Aisha claiming that Allah's messenger used to stay for a period in the house of Zainab bin Jahsh, this is one of his wives, and drink honey in her house. She said Hafsa and I, which are his other wives, decided that when the Prophet entered upon either of us, we would say, I smell maghfir on you. Have you eaten maghfir? When he entered upon one of us, she said that to him. He replied to her, no, but I drank honey in the house of Zainab bint Jahsh, and I will never drink it again. Then the following was revealed, O Prophet, why do you forbid that which Allah has allowed to you? So therefore, it is clear that it has nothing to do with lying and deception to non-believers or lying in any context whatsoever. Just to be sure, let us give you another interpretation. As we said, sometimes you will find that interpretations differ because that's the nature of interpretation. Another interpretation says that the Prophet swore that he would not go to his wives for 1 month because of his severe anger towards them, until Allah the Exalted and Most Honored censured him with the verse, why do you prohibit? So as we can see, one interpretation is that he had prohibited the honey from himself, and another is that he prohibited himself from going to see his wives for his anger that he had to them for a particular incident. And so therefore he was told, why is he prohibiting something from himself that is lawful? So God gave him the expiation. So these are the two interpretations of the verse. Notice neither one of them says it has anything to do with lying to deceive unbelievers or lying in any context at all. So these were many of the verses cited as a supposed proof that Islam allows Muslims to lie to non-believers for any reason and under any circumstance to promote Islam. But as we saw when the verses are read clearly themselves, that nowhere do they speak of such a concept. Nowhere do they allow such a thing. So in conclusion, we see nowhere does the Quran allow Muslims to lie to anyone for any reason to promote Islam under any circumstance. In this next section, we'll be dealing with some of the hadiths, which are recordings of said to be statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of the main hadiths that they like to use is this one here, which it states, "War is deception." This is clearly talking about war, not everyday normal interaction. So there's no way that this hadith can be used to claim that we are allowed as Muslims to lie to promote Islam in everyday interactions. It's clearly talking about in a situation of war. A bit of research shows that this statement, "all war is deception," did not even originate with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It originated with the Chinese military general Sun Tzu in the 6th century BC in his book entitled The Art of War, which is a book of military strategies in various aspects of warfare. And so it is in this book, and it is from him, where the idea that all war is based on deception. And this military treatise is studied by various militaries from around the world. Okay, so all militaries use and study this book and understand that there has to be strategies, there has to be tricks and espionage and things of that nature when warfare is the situation at hand. So once more, this cannot be used to claim that Muslims are allowed to lie to promote Islam in any and all situations. It is a total lie. Another statement in which they try to use to claim that Muslims are allowed to lie to promote Islam to non-Muslims is this hadith here, where it states there are 3 cases in which it would not be considered a lie. And one, that is to bring peace between 2 people by using strategies of diplomacy. So you bring peace between 2 people. The second one is the words that a person speaks to please a spouse. You know, your wife asks you, "Do these pants or does this dress make me look fat?" And you respond, "No, you look great. You are the most beautiful woman in the world. You're the sweetest woman," etc. This would be not considered lying. And the third is in battle or warfare. These have nothing to do with Taqiyah. If you go back to the first section of the video, which we dealt with, which had to deal with in a state of fear, when you fear harm coming from people. So as you can see, this has nothing to do with that. So this is not Taqiyah. And as you can see, these are not in any underhanded and evil ways. Bringing peace between 2 people, the common words that a person says to their spouse, you know, "You're the best, you're the greatest, you're the most beautiful woman in the world, best man I've ever known," etc. You know, although those things may not be literally true, but they're not considered as lying. And of course, in battle or warfare, it is quite common that a person will use strategies and espionage to try to defeat their foes. So this has nothing to do with Taqiyah whatsoever. The last so-called proofs that they try to use to claim that Islam has this doctrine of deception and allowing Muslims to lie for any reason to promote Islam are the stories about the killing of the warmongers. Now, of course, they tell us that these men were just poets, but if you look at the further details of the story, these people were more than just poets. They were actually warmongers. They were actually inciting people to and calling people to do violence, physical violence against the Muslims, to persecute the Muslims physically with physical violence and harm. And so these persons had to be dealt with. No different from the calls that we hear here in the West to get rid of leaders of certain countries because those leaders are calling for violence and inciting violence against certain countries, and people in the West seem to have no problem with trying to get rid of those persons. And so this is the same situation in the past when it came to the Muslims. And so in so doing, sometimes tricks of espionage had to be used to get rid of these persons. So this has nothing to do with Taqiyah and nothing to do with Muslims allowed to lie to promote Islam in any case. So they failed in all these attempts. They are misusing these hadiths, and yet when you look in further details, they do not support their claims. Let us now take a look at the scholarly opinions about what Taqiyah is, and let us see if the scholars of Islam condone and suggest that taqiyah means the allowance of Muslims to lie to non-Muslims in any case and any situations for any reason to promote Islam. Let us see what the scholarly opinion is concerning taqiyah. Now, we are told that taqiyah, its literal meaning is to safeguard, to fear. In Islamic terminology, it means to save one's life or the life of another by hiding one's belief out of fear of immediate physical danger. The scholar Abdul Hamid Siddiqui, concerning the issue of taqiyah, says, as such, one should not make a narrow-minded generalization that encompasses all situations, thereby failing to fully absorb the spirit of the definition. Some of the classical and traditional scholars, such as Jalal ad-Din al-Sayuti in his book Al-Dur al-Manthur fi al-Tafsir, tells us that Ibn Abbas, who was supposed to be one of the companions of the Prophet himself, said, Al-Taqiyah is with the tongue only, he who has been coerced into saying that which angers Allah. Abu Bakr al-Razi in his book Ahkam al-Quran, volume 2, page 10, has explained the aforementioned verse, except by way of precaution, that you may guard yourselves from them, by affirming that al-taqiyah should be used when one is afraid for life and or limb. It has been narrated by several scholars of the past that it has been narrated by Abd al-Razak, Ibn Sa'd, Ibn Jarir, Ibn Abi Hatim, Ibn Mardawa, al-Bahaki in his book Al-Dala'il, and it was corrected by Al-Hakim in his book Al-Mustadrak, that the non-believers arrested Amr ibn Yasir and tortured him until he uttered foul words about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and praised their gods. And when they released him, he went straight to the Prophet. The Prophet said, "Is there something on your mind?" Amr ibn Yasir said, "Bad news. They would not release me until I defamed you and praised their gods." The Prophet said, "How do you find your heart to be?" Amr answered, "Comfortable with faith." So the Prophet said, "Then if they come back for you, then do the same thing all over again." Allah at that moment revealed the verse, "Except under compulsion, his heart remaining firm in faith," dealing with the verses we mentioned in the first section, that where taqiyah is mentioned is only in such situations when you are under compulsion, you're being coerced, as this story shows here. The person was being tortured and made to say, things that were against the Prophet, against the Islamic beliefs, and so he was permitted to say this. It was not considered him lying or considered a sin, because he was obviously being tortured, and they were making him say these things against his will. But in order to preserve himself and his life and stop them from torturing, he said what he had to do, what he had to say, in order to stop them from causing him harm. And according to Islam, that is what is permissible. Moving on to further scholarly opinions, it is narrated by Al-Ghazali in his book Iya Ulum al-Din that safeguarding of a Muslim's life is a mandatory obligation that should be observed, and that lying is permissible when the shedding of a Muslim's blood is at stake. Another scholar, Alam Kazin in Libab ul-Tawil, volume 3, page 136, states, "This verse is directed to anyone who has been forced to denounce Islam, but is content with Islam in his heart, even if the reason behind this is out of the ordinary." Another, Usul al-Shashi, in the chapter Al-Dhimma, page 114, states, "It is permissible to swear at Rasulullah," that means the Messenger of Allah, "when one is under duress, and to recite the kalima of kafir, which is the statement of disbelief, in the fear of losing property or of getting murdered, provided that the heart is at comfort. Let me just say here that I'm sure that the people, you can see now that the scholarly opinion is in no way endorsing lying for any reason to promote Islam. These are all in a situation where a person's life is in danger because of his faith, his belief, and so you are allowed to say what the killers, the perpetrators, want to hear. If they want to hear you denounce Islam, then do it in order to keep them from killing you. That's just common sense. Sunni scholar Abu Shakur Salmi in Al-Tamhid fi Bayan al-Tawhid, chapter 1, page 18 and 19 states, similarly, kufr is the worst act. That means disbelief is the worst act. But when one is forced to commit it through a threat of murder, then it is permissible to adopt taqiyah and recite the kalima of kufr, the words or statement of disbelief. So we see very clearly that the scholarly opinion is that this is only used when your life is in immediate danger. Okay, it has nothing to do with lying to promote Islam, as they have falsely claimed. Also understand that this is only an option. You don't have to do it. And when you read the history of the Muslims, you will find that many Muslims did not take this option. That many of them continued to say that no, they believe in Islam, they believe in the Prophet, etc., even unto their death. Okay? So again, this is only an option. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, you can. Imam Nawawi wrote, all the scholars agree on the fact that if a cruel man comes to kill a person who is hiding, or comes to wrongfully take someone else's possessions and asks for information about that, then it is obligatory, wajib, obligatory on everyone to conceal it and deny knowledge of its whereabouts. This is not only permissible but obligatory, because its purpose is to protect an oppressed one from the grasp of an oppressor. Sharh Muslim Nawawi, volume 2, page 106 through 266 is where this is discussed. So this is further proof that this cannot be used in any situation. This is not used when a person is justly charged with a crime or something of that nature. It is for situations of injustice, wrongdoing, when there's an evil person trying to take your life or do you harm or take your possessions. So let that be clear. Okay? Lastly, we give you the words of Imam Abu Hussein Firah al-Baghwi. He commented, all scholars of the Muslim Ummah agree on the fact that at times when one is forced, one can denounce Islam. This is from Tafsir Mu'allim al-Tanzil, volume 2, page 214. And so we see from the clear verses of Quran, and now from the opinion of the scholars of Islam, that taqiyah has nothing to do with lying to non-believers for any reason and any situation to promote Islam. In fact, this has to do with hiding your faith, because they are trying to harm you because of, if you know, of your faith as being a Muslim. So you are permitted to say what they want to hear in order to preserve your life. If they want to hear you denounce it or they'll kill you, then do it. If they want to hear you curse the Prophet or they'll kill you or torture you, then do it. This is what taqiyah is, as the verses of the Quran clearly show, and what the scholars have now clearly shown as well. So we see that these people have been lying against us, trying to demonize the Muslims. But now the evidence is clear and apparent that they are wrong and they have been lying, and that Islam does not promote any such concept or idea, as the verses of Quran show and the scholars have clearly explained. Thank you. Next, what we're going to do is expose the hypocrisy and double standards of some Jewish and Christian persons who have been asserting this idea against Islam. We will show you from their own sources that they have a concept similar to taqiyah in their sources as well. Let us take a look. From the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, it states, "So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left, and I do not know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may be able to catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof." So here we see a clear example from the Jewish scriptures of what will be considered Taqiyah. These spies come and she protects them. Right? They are the spies of Joshua, and she protects them from harm by lying and saying that they had gone out a different way, when in reality she was hiding them in her roof. Further in the Jewish scriptures, to show that what she had done was an honorable thing, in Joshua chapter 6 verse 25 it reads, "But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her." Why? Because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. So let us take a look and see what is the Jewish scholarly opinion. According to Rabbi Michael Brody, he says, it can be clearly demonstrated that lying to save the life of an innocent person is permissible. Thus, this lie becomes legally justifiable to save one's own life too. Another rabbi, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, tells us, "We are permitted to lie or otherwise deceive unscrupulous people, even if we only suspect that our lives may be in danger." Sounds a lot like what the Islamic scholar said about Taqiyah, doesn't it? And what about the Christians? Let's take a look. Christian professor Dr. Michael Heiser tells us, "I would also say that lying in some of these contexts may also be justified." He says, look at the book of James chapter 2 verse 25. James is looking for biblical illustrations of genuine faith and the works that show faith is genuine. Of all the people in the Old Testament, he picks Abraham and Rahab. Remember, we mentioned Rahab at the beginning of this section. James specifically commends her in James chapter 2:25 for 2 things. 1, receiving the spies of Joshua, and 2, sending them out by another way. The second item is directly contingent upon her act of deception and her outright lie. James knew the story too. Rahab believed and refused to allow evil a victory. Let us read directly from the book of James and see. In James chapter 2 verse 24 and 25 it reads, "You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction?" So even the Christian New Testament gives praise to Rahab for what she did by deceiving to protect the spies of Joshua. She is commended for what she did, thereby proving that both the Old and New Testament condone what we with Islam call Taqiyah. They have a similar concept in their own scriptures, and it is promoted. It is praised. It is praiseworthy, as we see right here in the book of James in the New Testament. According to Worsby's Bible commentary, we read, "Many people have been honored for deceiving the enemy during wartime and saving innocent lives, and this was war." Lastly, we give you the words of Eric Sammons, Catholic speaker and head of evangelism at St. John Newman Parish. He writes on his blog, "Someone who has the right to know the truth. Here is the key component for the situation we are discussing. Does a Nazi guard or Planned Parenthood employee who plans to kill an innocent life have the right to the truth? Of course not. So we cannot lie to save a life, but we can tell an untruth if necessary, but in doing so, that is not a lie. So it is clear that the people making this claim, Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, and others, it's clear that they are ignorant not only of our own Islamic texts and scholarly rulings, but even of their own scriptures, which clearly have a similar, if not the same exact concept as what we would call Taqiyah. And so this section was meant to expose that hypocrisy and show them that in actuality their own religious teachings have a similar concept and ideology. This is our bonus section, and here we ask the question, which faith really does allow lying in order to promote that faith? The answer is Christianity, and we will provide you with the proofs to make that clear. When we look at the writings of Paul in the book of Romans chapter 3 verse 7, we read from Paul that he says, "But if through my lie the truth of God abounded to his glory, why am I also still being judged as a sinner?" In the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 16, another writing said to be of Paul, we read, "Be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you, yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery." Now I know, in all fairness, you could claim that I'm taking those verses out of context, I'm misusing it, etc. So let us then see how Paul proves that those verses are actually saying what they're saying, that he is using lies and deception in order to bring people to the belief. We read in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 19 through 23. Again, another writing of Paul, he says, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. So to the Jews I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I become like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I become like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I become weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some." So you can claim that the previous verses are being taken out of context or misused, but as we see here when Paul clarifies his position, that he was not. He was being honest. He was boldly telling you how he brings people to the belief. So he clearly uses deception and lying. He acts like a Jew to get the Jews. He acts like those who are without the law, although he admits he is not without the law himself, to get those without the law. To those who are under the law, although he says he is not under the law, he acts like that in order to catch those people. To the weak, he becomes weak. He does all these things, as it says, to win the people by all possible means. So, my Christians who want to make this claim against Islam, it is actually your faith that allows the lying to promote the faith, as these scriptures show you from an example of one of your prominent figures in your religion. So as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 23, "I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." To further make it clear that this is not something that I've made up myself, let's take a look at some of your early church fathers. We see Martin Luther, father of the Protestant Christianity and the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. What does he say? He says, "What harm would it do if a man told a good, strong lie for the sake of the good and for the Christian church? A useful lie, a helpful lie, such lies that would not be against God." Bishop Eusebius entitles the 32nd chapter of his 12th book of evangelical preparation, and he says, "How it may be lawful and fitting to use falsehood as a medicine, and for the benefit of those who want to be deceived. Lastly, we give you the words of John Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople, in his treatise on the priesthood, Book 1. We read, "For great is the value of deceit, provided it be not introduced with a mischievous intention. In fact, action of this kind ought not to be called deceit, but rather a kind of good management, cleverness, and skill, capable of finding out ways where resources fail, and making up for the defects of the mind. And often it is necessary to deceive, and to do the greatest benefits by means of this device, whereas he who has gone by a straight course has done great mischief to the person whom he has not deceived." So this is clear from your own Christian sources, that it is your faith that promotes and condones, by words of your own church fathers, deception in order to promote your faith. And so we end with the clear evidence being presented from the Islamic sources directly. From the Quran, we see that none of the verses that they use to claim that Muslims have this permission to lie for any situation and for any reason, we see that the Quran does not support that idea. Instead, the verses speak of Muslims actually hiding their faith, not even promoting it, but hiding their faith due to a hostile situation in which their life is in danger and they fear danger from their persecutors. We looked at the hadiths, and the hadiths that we mentioned, none of them have anything to do with Taqiyah either. And then we looked at the opinion of the learned people of Islam, the Islamic scholars, and we see that the Islamic scholars do not support this idea either. They support what the Quran says, that when a Muslim's life is in immediate danger, immediate harm, this is when a Muslim can say things that the persecutors want to hear, in order to keep the person's life intact. And so we need to understand that this claim stems from bigotry, no different from the Nazis and white supremacists who, if you look at their documentation, claims that Jews could lie to non-Jews, all in order to promote bigotry and mistrust of Jews. And now the same thing is being done to Muslims. So shame on these people, shame on these bigots for reviving old Nazi propaganda tactics against Muslims. Shame on those people. Okay? It is wrong, but the evidence is clear, and the evidence speaks for itself, that Islam does not condone or promote Muslims to lie to non-believers for any reason in any situation. This is a total bogus lie created by hate-filled bigots.